Hi, this is Elliot. I've been guest hosting partly this program for Harry for a couple days, and I feel like it's been a few days that we haven't talked about Donald Trump, or at least I haven't. So today let's talk about Donald Trump a little bit and what's happening with charges for him in New York, and specifically some interesting reporting in the New York Times recently about how he's being charged and might the particular charge hold up. There's an article called, In the Trump Case, Bragg Pursues a Common Charge with a Rarely Used Strategy. Now, let's back up. What exactly is the former president charged with? It's 34 counts, as you might know, of falsifying business records. Really straightforward. And in my opinion, on the just falsifying business records, were there records and were they entered into a book inaccurately? That's pretty clear and pretty straightforward. It's a misdemeanor in New York State. Now, the question is, to make that a felony, which Alvin Bragg, the district attorney in New York, has done, that falsification of business records has to be done to conceal or further another crime. And to be honest, that's where it starts getting a little bit tricky. And Harry and I have talked about this a little bit. So here's the challenge, and here's what we're seeing in New York right now. The prosecutor, any prosecutor in New York State, isn't required under law to articulate what that second crime is. You just have to say you're charging someone with falsifying a business record, but you don't have to say that you're charging with falsifying a business record to conceal some other crime, to conceal whether it's, I don't know, arson or burglary or robbery, whatever the second crime might be. You just have to say that there's another crime and you don't name the crime, right? Now, here's the problem. In virtually every other instance in which the Manhattan DA's office charged this particular crime as a felony, falsifying business records in an aggravated way to conceal another felony, they charged both crimes. They charged, for instance, falsifying business records and larceny. They charged with both crimes. It was when the records were being used to conceal an act of larceny. And in the few cases where the Manhattan DA's office didn't charge didn't name what the second crime was, it was just in a plea agreement. They just were charging the falsifying business records and saying, well, he's going to agree to it. He says he did something else. So we're just, we don't have to say what that other thing is. And it's a little bit tricky. Now, in Alvin Bragg's defense, not articulating and not saying what that second crime is actually gives him a little bit of wiggle room and a little bit of freedom, a little bit of flexibility in order to not get locked in. Because, for instance, at his press conference where he announced the charges, he said there might be 3 different crimes that the former president could be accused of that could bump up this falsifying business record charge. Number one, you could say it was done to violate state election law, because it was all these hush money payments that these records were falsified around happened in the middle of the 2016 election. And the whole point, at least as the charging document, or at least as the prosecutors are alleging here, the goal was to upend or disrupt the 2016 so many elections, 2016 presidential election. So state election law. State tax law, he could say, and Bragg could argue, and he said this at his press conference, that the president falsified business records as a means of concealing his taxes or in a sense, duping or tricking New York State tax authorities. And then the final one, and here's where, once again, like everything else in the law gets tricky, federal campaign finance law, that he falsified business records to violate federal campaign finance law that required him to be candid about the actions of his campaign in advance of a major presidential election. Now, that last one, federal campaign finance law, opened a door to a legal challenge from the former president, where the president then said, wait a second, you mean the Manhattan district attorney is charging me with a state crime that says that I violated a federal crime? Since when does a state prosecutor have the right, or even the authority to start alleging violations of federal campaign finance law? The answer here is to get this case out of the Manhattan DA's office and move it right into federal court, move it to the federal U.S. attorney's office or something. And, maybe has a point there. Now, it gets complicated because the New York State law just says falsified business records to conceal a crime. Doesn't say it has to be a federal crime, doesn't say it has to be a state crime, doesn't say it can't be a federal crime, doesn't say it has to be a state crime, just says a crime. But the president might have a point in that by bringing federal law into this, and this question's never been tested, at least in New York court, at least in modern memory, can an allegation of a federal campaign finance violation be used here? So it's a little bit tricky. Now, the argument that Alvin Bragg will say in court is that there are cases of burglary in the state where a burglary is committed to further another crime. You don't have to say what that other crime is. You just have to say that the other crime happened. So there's arguments on both sides. This is not as straightforward as it looks, but the saving grace for the Manhattan DA is that even if this federal one falls apart, he at least has two other state crimes he can fall back on, saying that the president falsified business records to break state election law and state tax law. So the big takeaways from this one are, I think a lot of people in America probably wish to see some measure of legal accountability or public accountability for the former president. And the simple fact is, law is complicated, and the particular law that someone is charged with doesn't always lead to the outcome that people want. And you just got to litigate it, which is my second point. The only forum for resolving these somewhat complicated legal questions, even setting aside the former president's habit or practice or penchant for delaying in the course of litigation, you still have to take it to court. He's a litigant just like anybody else. And these things take time to resolve. That's my final point, that you got to take it to court and it takes time to resolve. Now, look, these are allegations that go back something like 6 or 7 years, but still, in order to ensure that a case is, as prosecutors would say, righteous, you got to take it to court and make sure your charges can stand up. Look, there's an added element to all of this, which is that when charging when charging anybody, you want to make sure that your case stands up to scrutiny, particularly when charging a former president of the United States, which carries with it its own measure of additional legal challenges and complications. You just got to make sure that what you're doing is clear and legally sound. Sort of to quote a favorite TV show of many people, The Wire, you come at the king, you best not miss. And this is an excellent example of that, in which, in order to move forward with criminal charges, any prosecutor ought to make sure that what they're doing will hold up in court and will stand up. And we'll see within weeks or months or however long it takes to resolve these questions what you can actually do with charging this falsifying business records claim. So plenty more to talk about this. I am pretty sure Donald Trump, this is not the last time he's going to come up on this podcast or these YouTube videos. Thanks for joining. We'll be back soon.
Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.